just going to be starting with just a little warm-up review from last time. We did airspace and charts, right? But we didn't cover everything. So I just took a little snap off my phone from ForeFlight. This is, you can see on the screen there, Arnold Palmer. So I want somebody to read it for me. If you can't, that's right. We'll walk through it. All right, so you see Latrobe. I really want somebody to read the legend there, or the description of what that aircraft or what that airport is. Anyone have a way to do that? We'll step through it together then. All right, so Arnold Palmer Regional, that's the name of the airport. So and that's the abbreviation, LBE. So in America, you don't put K's in front of airports, even though we talk about KIDI, it's IDI, right? The CT means it's a control tower, and that's the frequency, 125.0. The star means the control tower is not in continuous operation. So it means you got to check your facility manual to find out what are its hours. So it's not always there. And then when it's not there, when there's not someone in the control tower, you still communicate on 125.0 as a common traffic advisory frequency. And that's what that dark C means. That's also the frequency for CTAF, like we would be 1228, they're 1250. All right, the ATIS, so we have an AWOS, Automated Weather Observation System. They have an Automated Terminal Information System. Have you flown to Latrobe? And you hear, so when you get their weather, you hear a person say, hey, taxiway Charlie's closed, here's the winds. Okay, so it's actually, and that comes out once an hour. So that's the Terminal Information System. That's its frequency, 118.375. What do you think 1199 is?
Field elevation.
Thank you, field elevation. And there's a little asterisk or star right next to the L. So the L means there's lighting, and star means it's something special. Usually it means pilot control lighting for here. But again, you'd have to check the facility directly. And what do you think 82 means?
Length of the runway, 8,200 feet.
Excellent, 8,200 feet. So that's the length and runway, hundreds of feet. So RP24, what does that mean?
Right pattern.
You got it. So remember, there's a big hill there, right pattern for runway 24. So it's reasonable to assume that when you come to a strange airport or you're diverting and you don't really know what's there, you check your map and you see, oh, there's an airport there, you're going to go there. It's reasonable to assume it's left traffic, but you'll see on the maps there, they'll tell you which ones are non-standard pattern. So that's what RP24 means. And so the reason I bring that up is if you're at night and you weren't really paying attention, didn't know there was a mountain there, that's why there's right traffic for 24, because there's a mountain on the other side. So they don't want you running closer to the mountains. Okay, so that's your little warm-up review. So we're also going to review here what 6 types of altitude we touched on last time. Altitude. So the first one, we're just going to review real quick. Indicated altitude. So when you set your altimeter, when you push outside here at the school, you get your altimeter setting, you set that. And then you go take off and you go fly somewhere for 4 hours. Well, as you travel, you're going to come to different pressures, different atmospheric pressure the farther away you go. So if you only set it once and continue to fly at, say, 6,000 feet or 6,500, your altitude would actually change depending on the pressure. So you're flying 6,000, but it's only a reference to your one machine. You'll have to watch there. We're using PowerPoint. So that's indicated. So these are altitudes you need to be familiar and kick around in your head. Absolute altitude, that's the height above ground level. So absolute altitude. One thing you should try and work on is getting in your brain what 1,000 feet looks like out the window. You fly a pattern all the time at 1,000 feet. Someday you're going to be at an unusual or a different airport and maybe things are busy and you forgot to check what's the pattern altitude, you can just look out the window and say, oh, that's about 1,000 feet. So for my flight test, my flight examiner took out 2 Post-it notes, put one on the airspeed, one on the altimeter, so let's go fly. That was after I'd already, I'm sure, I passed and he was just messing with me, right? But we flew a pattern with no, and so then after I'm on the downwind, he picked up the Post-it note off the altimeter and I was within 50 feet. And then he left the airspeed indicator blocked for the rest of the flight. But you should know what the airspeed is by sound, sight, feel, okay, and be pretty close. But you'll get that eventually. So anyway, that's absolute altitude. What's your true altitude? Well, true, that's MSL. That's what we talk about. You know, when we stand on the ground here, our absolute altitude is 0, but our true altitude is 1420 or something like that, right? And that's measured from the mean sea level. Okay, so they stand on the shore and they go, oh, over seasons, that's the height. Okay. Density altitude, or excuse me, pressure altitude. So if we're out here, and we've all had that experience, you pulled the airplane out of the hangar and you listen to the altimeter and, oh, it's way off, and you turn, right? That's because when someone put it away, the air pressure is different than, okay? And so that difference is what you're experiencing in pressure altitude. So pressure altitude, what you do is you set it to the standard barometer setting, which is 2992. So memorize that number, 2992. And then you see what your altimeter reads. So if you set it at 2992 and you're under, say, a low pressure, your altimeter thinks you're at a higher altitude. It's lower pressure. So it's going to read, say, 1,800 feet, even though you're on the ground. If you're under high pressure, you set it 2992, it thinks you're lower. And so you're going to say read 1,000 feet. So that's pressure altitude. Now, if you corrected that for a hot day, remember, low pressure comes by, there's fewer molecules. But what if it's really hot too? So if you had adjusted that for temperature, you'd get density altitude. So when we talk about high density altitude, it takes into consideration the low pressure and the high temperatures. Okay, so density altitude. And finally, GPS altitude. So if you've ever flown along, you know, most GPSs will tell you the GPS altitude in their box somewhere. But if you've ever noticed that, you know, your altimeter is saying, say, 2,500 feet, and your GPS altitude is, say, 800 feet difference. It can be huge difference. What's the difference? Why is that? Well, GPS altitude, because it's a mathematical thing, they had to define what the bottom would be, what 0 would be. And so they took a sphere and they squished it a little bit, and that's called ellipsoid. So, you know, the Earth is not a perfect ball. In fact, it's a little fatter at the equator because it spins, gets fatter. So they approximated that, but the yellow part is actually the shape of the Earth when you shrink it down. It has lots of variations. So you can be standing at sea level and it says you're, you know, standing on the ocean, your GPS altitude says you might be 10 meters off or something like that, 30 feet. It can be even different, much different. Even though mean sea level, right here, it's 0, mean sea level, your true altitude, your GPS altitude will be off. Okay, so that's why GPS altitude really depends on where you are. And what it does is, in the little box, it knows your GPS altitude. So that's your Z. It knows where you are in X and Y, and it has a database and says, well, right here, and it calculates for you. Okay. All right. Night. We talked a little bit about night last time. So what's the definition of night? Well, I just want to review the important parts, and then you can memorize the definition. So when the sun sets, so when it first touches the horizon, that's sunset, right? How do you figure out sunset, sunrise? Well, you go to ForeFlight or any of the electronic apps, and it'll tell you in your location what time it's sunset and sunrise. So the regs, and there it is, 91209 says from sunset to sunrise, you got to get your green and red and white tail light on, your position lights. Okay, that's what the FAR says. So it's not night yet, it's past sunset. So the FAA's defined sunset is at the end of civil twilight. So what's civil twilight? So remember, sunset is it's like when you set something down on a table, it doesn't go into the table, it sits on the table. Sunset is the time when the sun first hits the horizon at sea level. End of civil twilight is when that last little bit of sun dips below. So now you can no longer see it. Well, that's when the FAA says that's night, the start of night, when your sun is at sea level, sun is right below. So how do you know that? Well, it's calculated. They compute that for you at your location, but you're flying along and they don't publish end of civil twilight. They publish sunset. How do you know? Well, you're going to have to guess unless you go look it up. But the rule of thumb is about 20 to 35 minutes. So I use 30 minutes. So as soon as night comes, though, you're allowed to log night time. So you have to have a certain amount of night in your logbook, but you can't log it when you can still see the sun, right? All the sun has to be disappeared. So your plane needs to be equipped for night. So that's a different discussion about the required equipment for night. So unfortunately, though, if you land, so you're flying down the Latrobe, the sunset, you're on your way back, 20 minutes later, you've now can log night time, but you can't log a night landing. So the FAA really wants you, they're trying to cut your break actually, but it really needs to be dark to log that landing as night. You know, you can still see. So they define a night landing as one that's 1 hour after sunset. So it's has nothing to do with civil twilight. You just look at the time that's published for sunset, sunrise, and add an hour, subtract an hour. So you can log that as a night landing. So if you only flew for 20 minutes and then landed, you could log 20 minutes of night, but you're only 20 minutes after sunset, it's not a night landing. So that's just, okay. So that's a little bit of something to wrestle around with your head. You also need, how in day, if you carry a passenger, you need to have 3 landings in the last 90 days. So if you fly every day of the week, but then take someone up at night, you also have to do 3 night landings in order to carry a passenger in the last 90 days, because it's different that night. All right. So the summary is you got to use your anti-collision lights or your position lights from sunset to sunrise. That's the first slide. You can log nighttime 20 to 35 minutes after sunset, and that's the end of civil twilight. That's what FAA defines. And then you can log that landing when it's been 1 hour after sunset. Okay, that was the bonus. We'll get to the lecture today. All right, so today's topic is aeromedical factors and decision making. All right, so we all know that how you feel affects how you're flying. What we don't realize, though, there are a lot of medicines which will affect how you're going to fly. You may feel a little down. In fact, you probably have gone to work or gone to school when you're not feeling so hot. But the point is, flying takes all you got. So if you're behind the 8 ball the way you feel, you're not going to perform very well. And also your mental state will come into that. So here's some conditions that we're going to talk about: hypoxia, hyperventilation, and they're going to affect how we're going to fly. So what's hypoxia? Well, hypoxia is just not enough oxygen in your bloodstream. Okay. So, for example, putting your bag over your head and trying to breathe, you don't die of too much carbon dioxide buildup. You die of not enough oxygen in your blood. Okay. But for flying, it's caused by decreasing in that oxygen pressure as you climb up there. So it's still 20% oxygen in our atmosphere, but the higher you go, that pressure that it's pushing is less. So you got blood on one side, you got a layer of cells, and you got oxygen over on this side, and it has to get from one side to the other. It actually has to get, so that diffusion is related to its pressure. So it actually at 5,000 feet, they say 5,000 feet MSL above sea level. At night, your night vision starts to deteriorate. So when you do your long night cross country, if you get really up there above 5,000 feet, we're around here, we don't usually, you can start to have trouble with your night vision. And in fact, 12 to 15,000 feet, you start to get impaired judgment and memory problems, coordination, dizzy, drowsy, euphoria, headache, blue lips, and fingernails. So a lot of things that can go wrong when you're having hypoxia. So in fact, at 15,000 feet, you start to get tunnel vision. So you're, when you stand up too fast and you get a little, that's what you may start to have. And at 20,000 feet, you can actually lose consciousness without enough oxygen. So those broad generalities will apply at lower altitudes if, for example, you smoke or alcohol. In fact, one drink of alcohol will affect is about 2,000 feet. So if you start to lose your night vision around 5,000 feet and you start to feel fuzzy around 12,000 feet, well, take 2,000 feet. So at 3,000 feet, if you've had a drink, you may start to lose your night vision. Or at 8,000 feet or 12,000 feet, you'll start to feel those other effects. So if you add to that, a little bit of a leaky exhaust in your airplane, you add a little bit of carbon monoxide, may not kill you, but it's enough to multiply those effects of hypoxia. So carbon monoxide makes it worse. So the problem is it can be difficult to recognize. In fact, if you go onto YouTube and Google, hypoxic aviation, I'm sure you'll see a lot of those crashes. And some of them, they're interesting listening to ATC talk to somebody who's hypoxic, trying to tell them, hey, you need to get down. But the people don't realize what's going on. So here's what you need to know, the regulations, right? So up to 12,500 feet, the FAA says no extra precautions are necessary. So you can fly 12,500 feet. Now, they advise that you might think about using supplemental oxygen, the nasal cannula above 10,000 feet, or if you're on a long cross country above 5,000 feet for the last 30 minutes. Get your eyeballs back in the game, your night vision before you land. So even though you're down low, some people take oxygen for that night landing. Got it? So up to 12.5, no requirement. So 12,500 to 14,500, 14,000, you can go there, but you can't spend more than 30 minutes. So they'll give you a little window. So you're starting to push the envelope, but they'll give you 30 minutes. So here's where you're going to run into this. So for example, I've flown from Harrisburg to Indiana before, bringing the wife back. On a hot summer day, it's bumpy down low, right? So if you get above the bases on a scattered, there's a little cumulus over there, a little cumulus, get up nice and smooth, cool, everyone's happy. But then there's this big cloud in the way, a buildup, right? A cumulus. So you say, well, I'm going to outclimb it. Well, you might be able to if they're not that high, but trust me, they're higher than you think they are. But they're going to let you, okay, you're up over, you might have to pop up to 13,000. Right? But you only got 30 minutes to do it. All right. So between 12,500 and 14,000, you get 30 minutes. So above that, 14,000, you have to use it continuously. Your required crew, your pilot and your co-pilot, whoever's required crew needs to use oxygen continuously. And then above 15,000, you have to provide it for your passengers. They don't have to use it, but you have to at least offer it to them. So is everyone familiar with the Payne Stewart accident? Payne Stewart was a golfer, probably before any of you were born. No, not that. But he was flying from Orlando to Dallas, something like that, Texas. And on climb out, as they were heading northwest, somewhere along the line, they stopped answering calls, from ATC. They kept climbing. The autopilot leveled them off at the appropriate out 30,000 feet or 39, whatever it was. But they kept going straight. And for hours, they motored on and they didn't respond. So he sent jets to look at them, because this 9/11 era, you can't be doing that. And everything was frosted over. They couldn't see it. So there's no response. The pilot was in the pilot's seat and all the windows were fogged up and they kept flying. So eventually in South Dakota, I think, it ran out of fuel and crashed into a field. So Canada actually said that they would shoot it down if it crossed the border, but America didn't do that. Anyway, what's the point? They have no idea what happened. Here's what I suppose. Alarms go off in those pressurized aircraft when you start losing pressure. And the point is that you need to start doing something about it now, right? So at 30,000 feet, the experts say you got 8 seconds of useful consciousness. So 30,000. So the explosion, it blows up, but all the jets that were looking at their airplane saw no holes in the aircraft. It wasn't like it lost a window or something. But for some reason, the pilots didn't don their oxygen. If they did, they couldn't tell because it was such a violent crash. If they did, they must have run out of oxygen or not, but they couldn't determine what that was. But anyway, the point is it can happen really fast. So if the pilots knew about it, they were likely starting to troubleshoot before they put the mask on. Point is, though, that hypoxia can kill you if it's way high. All right, so don't mess with it. Carbon monoxide, as you know, you've gone through the systems part of your aircraft. You know that you get all this beautiful heat bound up in your exhaust, and not like your car, you don't have a radiator to get your heat from. You have to get it from the outside of the exhaust. So they blow air over the exhaust and it comes in the cabin. And as long as the exhaust stays on its side of the metal pipe, everybody's happy. But these planes are old. They go through a lot of vibrations, right? It's really hot. You can get cracks. So if there's any crack there, you can get exhaust coming in. Problem is, we've all smelled exhaust, especially on climb out, you smell it, but it's only for a few seconds, okay? And that's probably because of that turbulent time when you don't have as fast airflow, you're slow, got high power, and there's leaks in the cabin. So it's coming in probably from a door or the vent or something like that. But the carbon monoxide poisoning that you have to be aware of is the kind you don't smell. In fact, I know a friend who both he and his wife, they were flying, man, this headache, what's up with this headache? When they landed, they checked out the exhaust system, and in fact, they had a crack. So headache is the most common thing that I know of. So if you're not a headache person and you get a headache, that's the first bell should go off in your head. Okay. Again, all those other things, dizzy, drowsy. So even a small quantity, remember, as you go up in altitude, you have less oxygen. So the carbon monoxide competes for the oxygen more effectively, right? And it worsens the effect. So what's the fix? Turn off the heat, open the vents, get lots of air flowing, and then land if you're affected by that, okay? Hyperventilation, we all know what that is. Here's a test question, actually. Go ahead. Which would most likely result in hyperventilation, A, B, or C?
Sounds like A.
There you go. So that's right from your test, not that hard. Emotional tension, anxiety, or fear. All right. So hyperventilation is due to excessive breathing due to that fear and tension and anxiety. And the problem is not that you don't have enough oxygen, you actually breathe out the carbon dioxide. You need a certain amount of that in your blood. When you breathe out that carbon dioxide by hyperventilating, you get dizzy, you get cold sensations, tingling in your fingers, your lips, that kind of stuff. So what's the corrective action? Here's what's going to happen. It's not going to be you for the most part. You're flying, you're concentrating, you're focused, you're in control. It's going to be the person in the back seat. And now they're panicked. So how do you know how do you get them to stop? Do you have a brown paper bag like you see on TV? No. Barf bags might work, but no, you don't do that. You got to get them to talk to you, sing or count. Listen, you got to count to 20. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 20. 1, 2, 3, 4. And get them to slows down their breathing. Get them to focus on something. Okay. So sing, talk, that kind of stuff. And then once they get their breathing under control, those symptoms will go away. Problem is, there's the same symptoms that you're going to get with hypoxia. How do you figure that out? Well, if you're breathing 60 times a minute, that's your clue. Okay. So you might have to do a little diagnosing when someone's not feeling good in the plane. Motion sickness. So the problem is the inner ear gets all these stimulations continuously. We all have had motion sickness, vomiting, nausea, disoriented. And in fact, here's how you're going to run across it. You might have it. I've had motion sickness a couple times under the hood for 2 hours, flight training approaches in a bumpy hot day. At the end of 2 hours, that's all I can take. It's cumulative. I don't normally have that trouble, but it builds up, right? Here's where you're going to hit it. You've gotten your private ticket. You ask your friend, hey, let's go for a flight. Nice summer day. You go out there. Hey, let's go over here. You want to do some flying? Yeah, all right, go ahead and take this stick. Where's your house? Let's go to your house. Now let's start circling the house up there. Well, that stimulates the inner ear. It's a bumpy hot day, and they're not looking at the horizon. That's where you're gonna run across. They're also nervous because they're in charge of the plane. And just the fact that they grab the wheel, the stick, the yoke, whatever, brings on that motion sickness. So what do? You know what to do. Keep your eyes focused outside. Stop moving your head. So if it happens to you while you're flying, concentrate on keeping your head still. If you're looking around, use your eyes. Try not to move your head. It's the inner ear, the stimulation is the problem. Okay. So I know a few people who try to take Bonnie because they get sick, which is Andovert. Can you do that? Ixnay. FAA says no. Why? How about Dramamine? All those things. The patch makes you sleepy. Anything makes you sleepy. If you ever done night flight, it's a wonderful thing. It's usually calm, smooth. It's dark. The engine's droning on. It's a recipe. Okay, so what do? You know what to do. So when you're doing maneuvers, if you have this, some people have it to start as a student. It's okay. It's normal. It's expected. Well, if you're going to do maneuvers, and steep turns are the ones where you get it, because you're doing that G, maybe 1.5 G maneuver. You're not really looking at the horizon. You're looking down. Your head's all messed up. Take a break. Reset your gyros. Look at the horizon for a little while. Take a straight level break. So communicate with your instructor. Tell them, hey, listen, I'm getting a little woozy. Or my rule is I'll do it twice and we're done. Okay, so first time, then we take a little break, second time, because otherwise then you messes up the rest of the flight. So maybe spread out those maneuvers. Okay, so that this is from your test. This is a test question. Pilots are more subject to spatial disorientation if they, go ahead. What do you think? Anyone?
I have to go with A.
I'd say.
B. So it's B. So
Hmm.
here's the problem with spatial disorientation. Your body's telling you something that's not reality. Okay, it's confused. So the fix is to ignore those sensations because they're lying to you. All right. And so, right, the answer is B.
I mean, it's
So remember the fix is don't move your head on the motion sickness. Same thing with disorientation. You use your eyes when you do your instrument cross train. Okay. So it's the false perception of your position with relation to the earth. and it can result in confusion. So there's any number of pilot mishaps where, in fact, if you go on an AOPA website, I think it's 72 seconds till you die or something like that. So the average VFR pilot entering IMC has about 72 seconds till you're dead. That's not because of this. Well, it is because of disorientation. They're not focused on the instruments. Okay. So when you do your instrument training and the hood work that you did today, part of that is you have to learn to ignore what your head's telling you. Trust your instruments. Okay. So here's where you're going to run across it is at night. You know, suddenly the ground's foggy. You don't see the lights anymore. You don't have those references. Dust, or here in the summer, it's haze. So if you're heading west at sunset, you know, on a hazy day, you might lose the horizon. Now you can see beautifully behind you and below you, but you might lose it. So what do? You got to rely on those instruments. Here you go. Here's another test question. Which technique should a pilot use to scan for traffic to the right and left during straight and level flight? Hey, thank you, Nick. Yes, so you need to focus. So they say it's at 10-degree segments is what the FAA says. Well, if you got 90 degrees and you spend 2 seconds each, do the math. You know, 20 seconds to run, whew, that's tough, but that's what they say. So definitely relying on motion is not going to work, because relative motion, aircraft's coming at you and there's no relative motion there. And going like this, you know, clear left, clear right, unless you're on the ground and you're only looking at one spot on that runway, it doesn't do any good. So you got to slow down your scan, right? All right. So what I want to point out is at night flying, it takes about 30 minutes for that night vision to really be prime. So how do you do your pre-flight inspection on a night you're going to go flying? Well, if it's out on the ramp, use red lights. You know, in your little headlamp, it might have white and red. Use right. So start using the red lights ahead of time. If you're in the hangar here, you're going to have to wait. So do your pre-flight inside, push it outside, close the door, and now plan on at least 10-15 minutes of dawdling to let your night vision. Okay. Also at night, remember off center. You look right at something at night, you're not going to see it as well as right off to the side. And so there's some vision, some of these illusions we're going to talk about. So the runway width illusion. So how wide is our runway? You know, 100 or 100 feet. 100 feet wide. It's big. Punxsutawney, have you ever landed there? Sometime do a diversion. Tell your instructor, all right, we're diverting. This is your diversion practice. And wherever you are, find Punxsutawney, looking at the map, whatever, headings, and do a touch and go there. It's 50 feet wide. It's totally different. It's a different feeling, 50 feet wide. Latrobe, they just got their runway wide. It's 150 feet wide. I mean, you could land a Cub sideways on the runway, right? So those differences in your sight picture, you're used to landing here at Indiana. Every landing you've ever done has been here at Indiana. Same width. So if you have, say, a narrower runway, your brain is going to tell you, oh, you're high, right? Because you're used to seeing this, and then you're going to flare too low and bang the nose, right? So be careful. Same way with a huge 150-foot wide runway, you know, it seems really like you're low and you'll flare high. Anyway, so there's illusions there. Upslope, again, so if the runway, there's not many around here, there's a grass strip north of here that has a nice, beautiful hill, but it can give you those illusions too. So if you're landing and it's snowing or the runway's covered in snow, you'll lose that sensation that you're used to seeing, and you're going to flare too low. You won't perceive the runway properly. Rain on the windshield, they say, it's never happened to me, although I have flown in the rain. I haven't got the illusion. Also, bright lights. So if you turn them up, turn them up to 7 clicks at night, it's so bright, you'll think that you're closer than you actually are. Your body's using all those signals, just like I told you. You can fly all day and do a nice landing without an airspeed indicator if you know all the signal, your body knows how to interpret those signals. Same way with your vision in the landings. Okay, so sinus and ear block, real quick changes in pressure. We're all familiar with that. What you need to remember is when you get the sniffles, you may run into problems because those little passages get clogged up, and we all know that, right? And pain. So it's not just sinus pain, it can be tooth pain. So your maxillary sinuses here, your brain interprets that as, oh, my teeth hurt. So swallow, yawn, blow your nose. Scuba diving. How many divers out there? Anybody?
I used to dive.
So all the divers out there learned about decompression. So every 30 feet of water is another atmospheric pressure. Just like, so when you're down there, the nitrogen gets dissolved in your bloodstream. And if you come up too fast, it's like opening up a Coke. All those little bubbles, the nitrogen comes out of solution. That's called the bends or decompression, sickness. Okay. So everyone knows about that when you're diving, but not everybody knows that the problem comes when you go into the airplane. The symptoms, pain, dizziness, headache, but mostly pain, brain fog. So what the FAA says, listen, you need to wait 12 hours, even if you're flying. So someday, maybe, you're going to fly your airplane to Florida, then you hop over to the Bahamas, maybe do a little diving, come back. So you need to wait 12 hours after your dive, even if it's a non-decompression dive. So you're just down there 30 feet. So I think you can spend 60 minutes, our divers out there, 60 minutes at 60 feet. That stands out in my mind.
Yeah, sounds right.
Yeah. So you can, that's like a whole tank at 60 feet. You can get a whole hour without having to do those stopping on the way up and breathing and all that fancy stuff. You're still good to go. But you need to wait at least 12 hours for flights up to 8,000 feet, or 24 hours if you're going to go, if what you did was beyond that. So if you did where you actually had to follow decompression tables and that kind of stuff, you need to wait for 24 hours afterwards. And that includes commercial flights. Why? They generally run their cabin altitudes around 8,000 feet, but what if they get some kind of decompression? So suddenly, now you're like the Coke bottle, and all that nitrogen built up inside you is bubbles. Okay, so that was the aeromedical risk reduction. All right. I tell my students early on in their career, you can cut your risk of dying in an airplane by doing 3 things. So 50% right here, right now. So generally the risk of dying in an airplane is the same as that of a motorcycle, 1 in 7,000. We accept that, but that gives you a ballpark. So you can cut that by 50% by doing 3 things. First one, don't run out of gas. A lot of GA accidents are fuel mismanagement. Here's my story. There was an instructor, she taught here. I saw her maybe 3-5 times 10 years ago. She was taking an instrument student up in 6-6 Golf. The 2-hour lesson, flying instruments, doing all their things, come back. I'm the next guy for the plane. Bring it to the tabs. How much, who flies a Cherokee? Anyone? 18 gallons. Guess how many gallons I put in that one tank?
18.
No, they had 1 gallon. 17. The other tank was still at the tab. So they flew 2 hours off 1 tank because they started out, I assume they started at the tabs. So, in the Cherokee, even though you got plenty of gas on board, unless you turn that selector, you could be embarrassed. There's been at least one episode here on this airport where on climb out, engine quit and started right in the flare after they switched tanks. Check. So be aware of that. So number one, don't run out of gas. Two, don't fly into the clouds. So you're not going to fly into the cloud. They call this VFR to IMC. You can see a cloud. You're not going to run it. It's going to be a scuzzy day. It's going to be 5 miles, then it's 4, before you know it's 3. So you need to know that visibility and how to estimate it. So why do you need to know visibility? Why is visibility important? We talked about it. Keeps the wings level. Why do you need 3 miles? You got to see the ground to keep the wings level. FAA says, listen, if you're sitting in the cockpit and you just look over the nose of the plane, the ground you see the closest is generally the same height away from you. So say if you're 10,000 feet in the air and you look down on the nose, what you're seeing is about 10,000 feet from you or 2 miles away. That's 2 miles of visibility. You need at least 3. So don't push it. So the third thing is don't screw around close to the ground. So when you take your friend out and that first flight out there, don't be showing off near the ground. Okay. Okay, so those 3 things will cut your risk by, and that's easy to do. Watch your fuel, watch those visibility days, be really hesitant on those, and don't screw around close to the ground. All right. So FAA defines aeronautical decision-making as the systematic approach to the mental process to determine the best course of action in response to a given set of circumstances. That's their definition. They define also risk management is part of the decision-making process that relies on situational awareness. So you got to know what your problem is. You got to recognize there's a problem, and then you have to use good judgment. Okay. Crew resource management, you guys heading to the airlines or to more organized crew resource management. Basically, they're going to hound into you. You got to use everything that's available to you. People are a great resource. What's in your cockpit is a great resource. ATC is a great resource. Whoever's in the cabin might be a resource for you. And the point is on that, communicate. You got to be able to talk to these people and say, hey, has anyone got any ideas? Back in the 80s, and if you watch old airplane crash videos or shows, the captain was, nobody questioned the captain. That's not the case today. All right. So here's what you need to know. This is going to be on your test, guaranteed. 4 fundamentals of risk reduction. So what are the 4 factors we generally identify? Pilot, aircraft, environment, and external pressures. And they make a nice little way to remember it, PAVE. So we're going to talk about those 4 factors because they're the largest contributors to our risk. Okay. Pilot, aircraft, environment, external pressures. So pilot. So you got to figure out, is the pilot safe? That's you. How do you figure that out? Well, they gave you, FAA came up with an acronym, I am safe. Right? I, illness. So when you have the sniffles, you're not feeling good, remember, it's all you can do to fly this airplane most days. And when you're not hitting on all cylinders, you're not going to do so well. Okay, so you're going to decrease performance. In fact, one of them, 10 years ago now, I see his name over there. A student, he was an IUP student, showed up on a Saturday morning for his flight lesson with me, and he was obviously hungover. Well, I knew exactly what was going to happen. So he needed to learn. So we went up and flew, and it's terrible. His performance is terrible. So you guys are paying a lot of money to do this stuff. Do yourself a favor. If you're not 100%, it's a waste of time. Your performance is going to be terrible. You're going to feel bad about it. You're not going to learn anything. Okay, so just save your coin. So I am safe. Illness medication. All right. So remember, stuff that we take, or not we, you can take on a day-to-day and not think about it, is verboten, like NyQuil or Benadryl. So NyQuil, stuffy, sneezy, achy, so you can sleep medicine. ATC or FAA says 60 hours between that dose and the first time you can crawl in the cockpit. So if you're going to take something, check out the AOPA has a, you can just Google FAA medication list, something like that, and check on your medicine. So if you've gotten a medical, clearly they've cleared the medicines that you might be taking as being okay. But if you're going to start another medicine, if you're going to and your doctor say, hey, I need you to take this medicine, you go, uno momento, por favor, and check out the website, because there may be other options, does the same thing that's allowed on the FAA. Problem is, once you get on that, if you fill that prescription, now you have splaining to do next time it comes around. So even if they write the script, don't get it filled until you check. Okay. Sleep. I am safe. Illness medication, sleep. So whatever you normally run, if you're an hour or two less than that, again, you're just wasting your time. It's your performance, especially, is going to be less, and especially if you're having an unusual situation or emergency situation where you need all cylinders firing, you won't be doing that if you're under that. So 8 hours from bottle to throttle, that's what you need to know. FAA also, so what's the DUI for Pennsylvania?
0.08, I think.
0.08, yes, 0.08. FAA says, it's 0.04 in the cockpit. So buzz driving is drunk driving. Well, 0.04, probably you wouldn't feel it all. FAA says if they gig you, that's DUI for that. So John Denver, anyone know John Denver? Musician, songs, Rocky Mountain High, and all that stuff, right? Yeah. So if you look at he died in a plane wreck. He bought an experimental. That wasn't the reason why I'm bringing this up. The reason I brought it up is he actually had his pilot's license, or excuse me, his medical was revoked because he had a DUI not too prior to that. So he actually wasn't even allowed to fly the day he died. Anyway. So I am safe. F is fatigue. So sleep deprivation is 1 day, but fatigue, I mean, all week of finals or something like that, at the end of the week, you are just beat. It's a chronic thing. You're not going to be thinking well in the cockpit. And eating. So if you've flown or you're running behind, if you're hungry in the cockpit, that's a problem. Nibble on something and stay well hydrated. Okay. The other I am safe E part of it is emotion. So emotions matter. So if you're just coming off a fight with somebody, you might want to cancel that because you're going to be distracted in the cockpit. So A, remember, that's the 4 risk factors. P is pilot. We talked about pilot. A is airplane. All right. So remember, we talked about what's going to be the risk factors of this airplane. If is it a clunker, not maintained well? Also, if it's a hot day, well, that's environment, but your load distribution, are you over gross? The fuel reserves, high density altitude. Again, all those are risks that you need to, will this plane handle that kind of density altitude? Know your performance charts. Also in the cockpit, there's any number of times. I once owned an airplane with a very nice autopilot, and it took me a long time to learn it. You read the book, you get in the cockpit, your brain shuts off. Right? So many a time I said, what is it doing? What is this doing? Now, of course, until I got good at it, I wasn't in the clouds with it. So I could see the ground. nothing's unsafe, but no, you got to know those avionics. The good news is your plane, the 66 Golf especially, has a lot in those little GPSs that people only scratch the surface of. It's a great resource if you can use those avionics well. Also, your charts I showed you today, right pattern for 2-4 Latrobe, if you needed it. Well, you wouldn't know that it was right pattern unless you knew how to read that chart. So your brain is going to help you out if you can learn that stuff for the charts. So in the winter, we're coming off the winter, but I see a number of people climbing the cockpit in the winter with very, they got paper shoes on, light jacket. Well, engines quit. That's what they do. Man made them. They're going to quit from time to time. And odds are you're going to land in the field somewhere. So you better have survival gear enough and clothing enough to stand out in that field for a couple hours till help comes. So make sure you got enough clothing to do that. Okay, survival gear, more important in Alaska. Checklist. So we talked about a couple weeks ago about what's required in your cockpit or what's required in the airplane, the aero documents, right? Airworthiness, registration,
Weight balance.
operating manual, weight and balance. So the operating manual, where is it kept? Can you get any farther from the pilot? No. Why do they say that has to be in there? There's a whole bunch of checklists in there. If the manufacturer, now the older planes, the manufacturer said, hey, good luck. They didn't do much checklist. But how about engine roughness? What are you going to do? Well, you're going to have one memorized. But if you have time, it's good to go through that checklist. But remember, when things are happening fast, if those instant checklists need to be here, not in the back of the plane. Okay, so a lot of times we have cards for our checklists and might have a few of the emergency checklists on the card. Not all of them on there, probably. So it's in your best interest to either get familiar with them, memorize them, or get a complete checklist. All right. So pilot, airplane, environment. What are the risk factors there? Clearly, that's a no-brainer. If the crosswinds are too much for you, don't fly. So scud running, again, we talked about keeping visual contact with the terrain. And know those weather forecasters are marginal at best. Okay, things can change. Icing, don't mess with it. We are downwind of the lakes, as you know, and you got all that lake effect. Usually in the winter, that layer is 6,000 to 8,000 feet. So it'll be snowing down here, and you hear piston airplanes flying across. What's up with that? Well, the lake effect generally is wet clouds down low. And those wet clouds in cold conditions come to ice. So don't mess with icing. Turbulence. Bumpy in the air is not so much of a problem. Gust factor in the landing is really going to be the problem for you. Okay. And external pressure. So this is probably, we're trained to analyze the airport conditions. That comes hardly without thinking, I don't want to fly today. But it's those external pressures like trip delays. So you're familiar with JFK Jr., John, in his accident. So John F. Kennedy Jr. was going to fly his wife, and his sister-in-law to a wedding on Martha's Vineyard. So from New York to Martha's Vineyard. Well, the sister-in-law got delayed in traffic by an hour and a half. So now it's dark when they're taking off. They should have, it's only a 40-minute flight. So it's dark. They're feeling the pressure. He's rushing. So don't get sucked into, you got to recognize these external pressures. When you're captain of the ship, you got to make the call that, hey, this isn't working out for me. So you got to be tough enough. So you've invited your friend, hey, let's go fly, but you don't like something. So you got to be tough enough to take the heat and say, listen, we're not flying today. All right. So those pressures of your passengers applied to you can make you make stupid decisions. The get there-itis, got to get there-itis. So JFK had that. He should have canceled his trip. He was flying into fog and got disoriented and crashed into the ocean. He should have, but he had that mission mentality. He should have canceled it. So if you start feeling that, perceiving like, hey, would I normally take this flight if it was say a Saturday afternoon? No, but I feel like I got to do it. We're not at war, guys. You don't have to fly, right? All right, so here's another FAA question. Hazardous attitudes occur to every pilot to some degree at some time. What are some of these hazardous attitudes? Go ahead.
A.
Yeah, it's definitely a.
Yeah. So poor situational awareness is not a hazardous attitude, and poor risk management and lack of stress management is not a hazardous attitude. So that's just a list that they want you to know. So FAA says there are 5 hazardous attitudes that are going to contribute to your poor judgment. And so you need to recognize them and neutralize. They talk about neutralizing them. So you have to label it, you recognize it, you label it, and you neutralize it with this antidote they call. All right, so what's the hazardous attitude? Anti-authority. So basically, you can't tell me what to do, you know. But remember, all these FAA rules were made basically with someone's blood. There was some accident, some incident, and that sparked the rule. So somebody it didn't turn out well for, and that's why we have the rules. So basically, the rules are there for your and our safety and everyone else's. Okay, impulsivity. So you got to do something quick. Well, remember, you need to think about it. So there are some times where you got to act quick, but most times in an airplane, you have time to think about what's going on. So just like we talked about, those rules were written in blood. You don't be thinking that, oh, that'll never happen to me. You know, so you are vulnerable. Things can happen to you. So that's why you need to look at this risk management stuff. Macho man, right? Well, you're willing to take chances, fly under that bridge like you did last year, right? But taking chances, that's foolish. Okay, so they want you to recognize the attitude and do the answer. So resignation, I have no problem in making a decision here, but some people say, I'm in the airplane and you quit. We have one guy in the field say, I'm going to crawl in the back seat. Anyway, so you're not helpless. You can make a difference. That's what the FAA says. So we're almost done. Single pilot resource management. We talked about crew resource management, but you're mostly going to be flying your career, unless you're in the airlines, you're going to be flying a single pilot. So what's the idea? You need to use everything available. When you got an issue going on, use everything available. People, material, you have to recognize them. So what resources can you not only recognize, but make better? And that is, you got to be prepared. So preparation, you didn't get this far by just taking up this is a light hobby. You need to be prepared for it. Okay. You need a bowl full of experience, and you get it one spoon at a time. Would you go drive with someone who only drove 2 times a year? A motorcycle, especially, same risk. Would you go? The answer is not really. So if you're going to do this, you got to stay good at it. Okay. And then use those checklists. So in your head, emergency checklists. Sometimes, I had an engine quit on me here, a couple 100 feet, 300 feet maybe. You don't got time to find that card and find out what you're going to do. Okay. So know the normal, if you don't memorize them, make sure you follow them. Also, don't be afraid to ask. So my dad was air traffic controller. He loved to help people. I know these guys out there over dinner, they would love to tell a story. You know what? Some pilot today called up, they were lost, I helped them. That's cool, right? That's what they're going to live for. So don't be afraid to use other people, other pilots, aircraft, again, airport personnel. And remember, you're going to have to manage this workload. So a good pilot is 2 steps beyond already, thinking, anticipating. When you fly across countries, don't sit there looking out the window. Yes, you have to worry about your heading and your altitude and keep track of the ground, but you don't want to be showing up at that next airport and you haven't done all those things that you need to do ahead of time. So be ahead. In all situations, you got to fly the plane, no matter what's going on. So in your pre-flight briefing, you're going to tell your passengers, look, there'll be times when I can't help you. You have a question where I sing right out, but especially when we're taking off or landing, I got stuff I got to do. So prioritize. Okay. So here's another test question. Who is responsible for determining whether a pilot is fit to fly for a particular flight, even though he or she holds a current medical certificate?
The pilot. See.
Pilot.
Exactly. The pilot. You're the one that determines whether it's safe to fly. So basically, you have to figure out whether or not you're fit to fly. So one of the questions you got, if I walked into the medical examiner, can I pass my medical today? And remember that human error is the correctable factor in all the preventable accidents. Yeah, stuff breaks, but preventable accidents, which are a lot of them, human error is the one. So the pilot who is involved in an accident usually knows what went wrong and was aware of the possible hazards when they made the decisions that led to that